Welcome back to another BRIDGE6 and BRIDGE4 MIDI controller tutorial. The BRIDGE6 and BRIDGE4 MIDI controllers have some great features. Today we're going to talk about our Flexiports. On the back here you can see we have two TRS jacks which are labelled as Flexi1 and Flexi2, and that's the same on the BRIDGE4. You can see Flexi1 and Flexi2. The Flexiports have a number of modes. They're very versatile. You can have 4 different types of TRS MIDI out, type A, type B, tip active and ring active. That covers all of the standard MIDI implementations of TRS that you'll find on pedals like Chase Bliss, Alexander, Meris and others. Next we have our own special device link, and that allows you to connect 2 or more bridge controllers via the Flexiports with a TRS cable. Device Link has a number of great features which make it easy to connect 2 or more bridge controllers and make it manageable. First is the synchronization settings. So you can synchronize the bank changes so that you change bank on one device and it changes bank automatically on the other devices connected. And then you have the bank name synchronization, which will actually copy the bank name of the master device over the bank name of the satellite devices. After the synchronization settings, there's also settings which combine the switch groups to interact across the device link network, and the MIDI transmission settings, which allow MIDI to pass through devices one to the other really quickly, including MIDI through settings and sending messages from one device out the outputs of another bridge device. Next we have the expression pedal inputs. The Flexiports can by default take one TRS expression pedal per Flexiport, or using our expression doubler device, you can plug 2 expression pedals into one Flexiport, making up to 4 expression pedal inputs possible on each bridge controller. Next, there's the auxiliary switch in mode, which allows you to plug in a triple auxiliary switch into each Flexiport, giving you up to 6 extra external switches. A triple external switch will need to be a TRS switch. Each of the switches on an auxiliary switch can have a message assigned to a toggle off stack, press, and hold. So you can have up to 4 messages on each of your auxiliary switches, including smart messages. So that's 24 different messages, including smart messages, per bank for your auxiliary switches. But then there's also the global auxiliary switch messages. So then you can assign another 4 messages to each switch at a global level. Next we have switch out mode, which can be used to send 3.3 volt analog switching signals to devices like a Boss Gigadelay DD20, which has a tap tempo input for an external switch. But if you plug a TRS cable from the Flexiport into the Boss Gigadelay, you can use your bridge to automatically control the tap tempo as well. Another form of that is our MS relay mode. Now this controls the Morningstar Omniport relay interface, which is by default only really able to be used with Morningstar controllers. However, we have designed a Flexiport mode which will send the correct control signals to the Morningstar relay interface so that you can use that with your bridge controller. And last but not least, MIDI clock. There are 2 different MIDI clock output modes that aren't sending MIDI messages but are linked to the MIDI clocks on board the BRIDGE4 or the BRIDGE6. They are tap tempo out and pulse clock out. Tap tempo out mode sends that analog 3.3 volt switching signal in the tempo of the onboard MIDI clock that you've chosen, clock A or clock B. And then also the pulse clock mode sends a square wave pulse which is able to control the MIDI clock on devices like the Teenage Engineering Pocket Operator series or the Korg Volca series of mini synths. That covers all of the Flexiport modes in their basic function, so now let's see how to set them on the device. We'll do it on the BRIDGE6 this time. We enter the menu, go to Global, Flexiports, and then we want to set the mode of Flexiport 1 or Flexiport 2. Let's choose Flexiport 1. As you can see, there's no mode set by default. So let's choose a mode. There's the 4 MIDI out modes, the device link mode, expression doubler, expression auxiliary switch, switch out, MS relay, tap tempo, and pulse clock. Let's choose MIDI out type A. That's the standard MIDI TRS type for the MIDI organization. Now let's choose Flexiport 2, and for this one, we'll plug in an expression pedal, which I have over here. So we'll exit the menu, and you'll see here in the extended UI, we have an icon showing that we're using MIDI Out Type A mode for Flexiport 1, and on Flexiport 2, we have a bar graph which shows the expression pedal movement, which is really great for knowing that your pedal is actually working. And then if you're having trouble with it, you can troubleshoot whether it's the pedal or the MIDI messages that aren't maybe configured correctly. Let's look at some other device link modes now and see how they look on the main UI. Here's the expression doubler mode, which has 2 of those expression bar graphs. And here's the auxiliary switch icons, which shows some unfilled circles, which will be partially filled or completely filled based on whether you're pressing or holding the switch. So that's really great. And similar to the expression pedals, that allows you to see whether the switch is working correctly, as opposed to whether you need to trouble your MIDI messages. On Flexiport 1 here, I've set this to switch out mode, which is the analog switch emulation at 3.3 volts. And here on Flexiport 2, I've set the Morningstar relay mode, which has the same icon, which shows the tip and ring of a TRS connector, and will fill in the tip or the ring based on what settings you've set for each switch action or message, so that you know that the messages are set up correctly. And now to the clock. For Flexiport 1 mode here, we have the tap tempo out, and for Flexiport 2 mode here, we have the pulse clock out. These icons will be updated in the future to be a little bit more helpful. And that's all we have for the Flexiport modes. We will have future videos expanding on how to practically use each of those modes, but for now, hopefully that gives you an overview of how to use them and maybe even some creative ideas. See you next time.